Liana, thank you so much for joining me today on this episode. We're going to chat about property investing and creating financial freedom through property. How many properties have you got yourself?
I've got 27 properties now, just added another one a couple of weeks ago, so about 27. So I actually studied actuarial science, which actually we basically do a lot of forecasting for insurance companies and banks. But basically we study and try to understand the hidden patterns in the data, study a lot of data, trying to understand the hidden pattern in the data, and build models of prediction. So I thought that's a skill that I just translated to property. I actually just thought I could apply this to property investing. Once I figure out that you're not going to just save your way to riches, I actually had to look at different ways of getting to financial freedom fast. And I looked at all the different asset classes, and property was the one clear winner. And that's why I started looking at all the data and trying to understand, make sense of the property data and see whether you can build some sort of model to predict where the prices are going.
Yeah, and with the properties that, are in your portfolio, what are they made up of? What's the diversity like in those?
It's a mix of everything. So if you're talking about types of properties, so there are apartments, there are townhouses, there are houses as well. It's really a mix of everything, but it really depends on the area that you invest in. What is the best type of property to invest in for that particular area? So there's no one size fits all rule here. It's all about what is in huge demand for that area and what is and with the shortage of supply, and also affordability is also another question as well. So it really depends.
So when you say like the area, for example, the area that I live in, I think at the moment it's undervalued. It's only 12 kilometres from the CBD here in Brisbane. The suburbs surrounding are sort of selling for $100,000, $150,000 more than what you can buy in my suburb, and there's a lot of infrastructure popping up. So,
Whereabouts do you live?
Things. So I'm in Arana Hills in Brisbane.
Yep. Yeah, I like the area. I get what you mean. So that area, like a lot of that pocket, around the hills, McDowell, Everton Park, Everton Hills, that particular pocket, it's quite a nice area, and it does have a lot of strong fundamentals, like what you suggested. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when, people say, oh, you need to diversify and spread your assets, but if you do have a good area and, for me, I'm seeing a lot of properties still in a really good price point, around the 500,000 mark, big blocks of land, you're close to everything. It's walking distance to the shops. And so what are your thoughts on kind of buying up in an area if you've onto something good, and say you want to do maybe 2, 3, or 4 properties in that area? Is that something that you would be on board with or recommend?
I actually would recommend diversification, because there are a lot of fantastic areas around the country that you could invest in. So if you just take no bias in terms of where you want to invest, so not a particular bias against where you live. Because as an example, where I live now in Burwood in Sydney, it was a fantastic place to invest in back in 2013-14. It's not necessarily the best spot to invest in now for the immediate capital growth. So, and case in point, I know that Arana Hills has got a lot of things going for it, but there are, even in Brisbane, there are areas that have very strong fundamentals, arguably stronger fundamentals, that is going to see capital growth outperform Arana Hills in the next few years. So Arana Hills as a particular suburb, I do like it. It's also one of the suburbs that we are looking for in Brisbane, but I can tell you there are a lot more suburbs in Brisbane that actually have incredibly strong fundamentals and are particularly undervalued as well. So
Yeah.
diversification is definitely a good strategy, especially if you want to build a portfolio of multiple different properties. Another reason that diversification is important is that you have a lot of land tax implications that you got to consider as well. So and also you don't want to end up with a portfolio where there'll be every single city, every single area will go through its property cycles, and sometimes it's flat and sometimes it's growing, and that there is you got to be aware of the 70-30% rule, which means that in a property cycle, which might be doubling in value, and the property cycle may be going for 10 to 15 years, 70% of the growth in the property cycle actually will happen in 30% of the time. So you don't want to be stuck with a portfolio of properties that are just not performing for a number of years, where you can't actually release the equity out of out of your properties to go again. It's much better if you have a portfolio of properties where at any point in time you can pull out capital growth or equity from some of your properties. Not all of your properties, but at least some of your properties, so you can consistently build your portfolio up.